I first met Ethan 5 years ago, and the moment our eyes locked, something inside me woke up, a feeling I thought was gone for good. Love. I'd been hurt before, so I'd built walls around my heart, convinced romance wasn't for me. But Ethan? He was different. He had this easy charm, a kindness that didn't feel forced, and a quiet confidence that made me feel like I was finally safe. He was everything I'd dreamed of but never thought I'd actually find. Side note, isn't it funny how love can sneak up on you when you least expect it? But sometimes, what feels like a dream can turn into a nightmare. Just wait, When Ethan introduced me to his son, Liam, I knew this wasn't some fling. It felt real, like the start of something that could last. Liam was 15 back then, polite, a little quiet, and way more mature than most kids his age. He was respectful but guarded, like he was sizing me up, deciding if I was worth letting into his life. I got it. I didn't push. I took my time, knowing I had to earn my place in their world. Slowly, those walls came down, and what began as cautious small talk turned into something real. Ethan made me feel like I mattered in ways no one else ever had. Our house was full of life, laughter, shared meals, and those late-night talks that lasted until the sun came up. He'd hold my hand in public, leave little notes on the counter with things like, "Miss you already," and never left the house without kissing me goodbye. Those little things made me believe I'd finally found the kind of love you read about, the kind that becomes a part of you, unshakable and true. I gave everything to our marriage, making sure Ethan and Liam had what they needed. As Liam got older, we grew closer. He'd sit with me in the kitchen while I cooked, sometimes helping, sometimes just talking about his day, his friends, his dreams. I never had kids of my own, and for years, that felt like a hole in my life. But with Liam, that emptiness faded. He trusted me, and that meant more than I could ever say. Narrators aside, funny how life can make you think you've got it all figured out, only to pull the rug out from under you. But I'm getting ahead of myself, Then, little by little, things started to shift. Ethan began working late more often. His business trips became more frequent. The affection that used to feel so genuine started to seem rehearsed, like he was going through the motions. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Every relationship hits rough patches, right? People get busy. Stress happens. I made excuses for him, convincing myself it was just work taking its toll. He still came home, still sat at the table for dinner, still texted me during the day. But something was off. Something I couldn't quite put my finger on. One night, I decided to try and close the gap that had started to form between us. I made his favorite meal, creamy pasta, the one he always said I made better than anyone else. I wanted to surprise him, to remind him of what we had. I was setting the table when Liam walked in. He looked tense, his hands shoved in his pockets like he was bracing for something. "I need to tell you something about Dad," he said, hesitating. I froze, the plate in my hand suddenly feeling heavy. There was something in his voice, a carefulness, like he wasn't sure he should be saying this at all. "What is it, Liam?" I asked, my voice softer than I meant it to be. He hesitated, shifting uncomfortably. "I saw him with someone." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" Liam let out a deep breath, like he was carrying the weight of the world. "A woman. At a restaurant. More than once." The words hung in the air, heavy and toxic. I wanted to laugh it off, to tell him he must have misunderstood. But the way he looked at me, guilty, sympathetic, almost angry, made my heart sink. "Are you sure?" My voice came out weak, barely a whisper. He nodded. "Yes." The room felt like it was shrinking, the walls closing in. I stared at the table, at the food that now made me feel sick. Ethan wouldn't do this. He wouldn't throw away everything we'd built. Liam put a hesitant hand on my shoulder. "I thought you should know." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Thank you." He walked away, leaving me standing there, clutching a serving spoon like it was the only thing keeping me upright. I told myself Liam could be wrong. Maybe it was a business meeting. Maybe it was nothing. But deep down, something broke that night. When Ethan came home, I watched him closely. He kissed me on the cheek, smiled like nothing was wrong, the same man I'd loved for years. But now, there was something different. A shadow. A weight in the way he moved that I'd never noticed before. At dinner, I sat across from him, studying the way he twirled his fork, the way he talked without really looking at me. I wanted to confront him, to demand the truth, but I couldn't. Instead, I listened. He talked about his day, about work, about how tired he was. And that's when I realized it wasn't his words that gave him away. It was the way he avoided certain details, the way his voice didn't have the same warmth when he said my name. I nodded along, pretending not to notice how my hands shook under the table. That night, as he slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, replaying every moment of our marriage, every "I love you," every promise, every look that once felt so full of love. Had I been blind, or had I just chosen not to see? Sleep didn't come. My mind kept circling back to Liam's words, doubt twisting in my chest. But denial whispered that there had to be another explanation. I told myself I wouldn't jump to conclusions. I needed proof. The next morning, Ethan kissed me goodbye like always. But for the first time, I didn't kiss him back. As soon as he left, I grabbed his phone. It was locked. He never used to lock it. My hands felt cold as I stared at the screen. He was hiding something. I started paying closer attention, watching his expressions, noticing the little hesitations, the vague answers, the way he kept his phone glued to his side. The man I'd trusted with my heart was turning into a stranger right before my eyes. That evening, I checked our phone bill online. My heart raced as I scrolled through the numbers. One number kept popping up, late at night, during lunch breaks, even on weekends. My stomach twisted when I realized whose number it was. Jessica, my best friend. I stared at the screen, unable to breathe. It felt like a sick joke. Jessica, the woman who'd been in my life for years, the one I'd confided in, shared secrets with, the one who'd sat in my kitchen laughing over coffee. I didn't cry. Not yet. I needed to be sure. Over the next few days, I watched Ethan like a hawk. His excuses started piling up, working late, last-minute meetings, unexpected errands. Each lie stacked on top of the last, forming a shaky tower ready to topple. Then, on Friday night, he told me he had a business dinner. I smiled, nodded, and watched him walk out the door. As soon as he was gone, I grabbed my keys and followed him. What I saw that night shattered everything, and I knew there was no going back. Narrators aside, sometimes, you think you're prepared for the truth, but when it hits you, it's like a punch to the gut. And trust me, this one hurt. Ethan sat at the dinner table, twirling his fork absently, lost in thought, completely unaware of the storm brewing around him. The tension in the room was thick, but he didn't seem to notice. Until I spoke. "Liam, taste it first," I said, my voice calm but sharp enough to cut through the silence. Ethan's hand froze mid-motion. Liam hesitated, glancing between us, his expression wary. He could feel the weight in my voice. His fingers tightened around his fork, but he didn't move. "Go on," I urged, my eyes locked on Ethan, unflinching. Liam picked up his fork, about to take a bite, when I leaned forward slightly. My voice was quiet but razor-sharp. "I seasoned it with the same lies your father told me." The room went dead silent. The hum of the fridge, the distant sound of traffic, even the ticking of the clock on the wall, it all felt deafening in the stillness that followed. Ethan's fork slipped from his fingers, clattering against his plate with a hollow sound. His face went pale as he looked at me, realization dawning like a slow-acting poison, tightening around his throat. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and placed it on the table between us. The screen lit up, revealing the damning evidence I'd gathered, the truth he'd tried so hard to hide. His lips parted slightly, like he was searching for words, an explanation, an excuse. But nothing came out. He turned to Liam, but his son's face was already shifting, anger and disappointment bleeding through, raw and unfiltered. "How long?" My voice was steady, but inside, I was trembling. Ethan swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. It's not what you think. A hollow laugh escaped me before I could stop it. Really? I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed. Then what is it, Ethan? A business meeting? A coincidence? A mistake? His gaze flickered downward, avoiding mine. That was all the answer I needed. Liam exhaled sharply and pushed his plate aside, his jaw clenched tight. I looked up to you, he said, his voice dripping with betrayal. I defended you. Ethan reached for him instinctively, but Liam recoiled before he could make contact. Don't, he snapped. That single word cut deeper than any accusation ever could. The weight of his son's disappointment hit Ethan harder than anything I could have said. I stood, my chair scraping against the wooden floor, the sound grating and final. I won't scream, I said, my voice steady and deliberate. There was no anger, no desperation, just a quiet certainty that cut deeper than any outburst. I won't beg. I won't even ask why. I just want you to understand something. You destroyed something real. My gaze held his, unwavering, demanding a reckoning he couldn't escape. And for what? Ethan said nothing. The man who had once been my everything, the person I'd trusted beyond reason, now sat before me, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. The confidence, the charm, the effortless ease with which he'd once moved through the world, it was all gone. He was just a hollow shell, weighed down by guilt and choices he could never take back. I inhaled slowly, letting the moment stretch between us. Then I turned to Liam. You don't have to stay here tonight, I said, my voice softer now, offering him the choice neither of us had been given before. Liam met my eyes, understanding without words. He nodded once, rising from his seat with quiet finality. He didn't glance back, and I didn't either. Ethan remained motionless at the table, staring down at the untouched meal that had long since gone cold. His hands lay limp in his lap, his shoulders slumped, his entire being weighed down by the crushing realization of what he'd done, of what he'd lost. I walked away that night, feeling the weight lift from my shoulders with every step. And I never looked back. There was no dramatic confrontation, no impassioned demand for answers, no last-ditch effort to salvage something irreparably broken. The end didn't come with shouting or tears but with a quiet, resolute understanding that there was nothing left worth saving. I had given everything, my love, my trust, the deepest parts of myself, to a man who had discarded it all as if it were meaningless. As if I were meaningless. To stay would have meant turning a blind eye to deception, swallowing the bitter truth, and pretending that love, real love, could somehow endure betrayal. But love built on lies is only an illusion, and illusions shatter. The next morning, my phone rang. Ethan's name lit up the screen. I didn't answer. I sat there, watching the call go to voicemail, listening to the silence that followed. A few minutes later, a text arrived. Then another. Then another. Apologies, justifications, promises that this wasn't what it seemed, that if I would only talk to him, he could explain. But what was there to explain? Some things don't need elaboration. Some betrayals are simple in their cruelty. Sorry doesn't undo deception. Regret doesn't repair what's been broken beyond recognition. Liam stayed with me for a few days. He didn't say much at first, but I could see the weight of it pressing down on him, his own sorrow mingled with mine, unspoken but ever present. His father had been his guiding force, the man he'd looked up to his entire life. And now that foundation had crumbled beneath him, leaving him standing in the wreckage of an image that had once seemed unshakable. One evening, we sat together in the dim light of the living room, the air thick with everything we weren't saying. The TV was on, but neither of us was really watching. The flickering glow of the screen cast shadows across Liam's face, highlighting the furrow in his brow, the tension in his jaw. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper, like he was talking more to himself than to me. I don't get it, he exhaled, shaking his head slightly, his fingers tightening around the arm of the chair. Why do people destroy the ones who love them? I had no answer. Maybe there wasn't one. Maybe there never would be. I didn't have an answer, not a real one, at least. Not one that could truly explain why Ethan had done what he did. Maybe he'd convinced himself he wouldn't get caught, that his secret would stay hidden forever. Maybe, in his mind, it hadn't been as serious as it really was, just a fleeting lapse in judgment rather than a betrayal that cut so deeply. Or maybe, and this was the thought that hurt the most, he had never truly loved me in the way I'd loved him. I had loved Ethan with everything I had. But maybe, to him, what we'd shared was something temporary, something conditional, something he could toss aside when it no longer served him. In the end, though, the why didn't matter anymore. It wouldn't change what had already happened. It wouldn't erase the pain or undo the damage. Only the truth mattered now, raw, unfiltered, undeniable. I met Liam's gaze, holding it steady as I found my voice, letting the certainty in my heart shape my words. Love isn't just about feelings, I said, each syllable deliberate and measured. It's about choices. The choices we make every single day. I paused, letting the weight of those words settle between us, giving him a moment to absorb them. Real love doesn't lie. It doesn't betray. It doesn't make you question your worth or wonder if you were ever enough. Something in Liam's expression shifted, a quiet understanding dawning in his eyes, one that hadn't been there before. His father's betrayal had wounded him in ways that went deeper than words, but in that pain, he'd also found clarity. He'd seen firsthand the kind of destruction dishonesty could bring, and in doing so, he'd learned something invaluable, the kind of man he never wanted to become. Ethan, however, wasn't ready to let go. He kept trying to reach out, leaving messages, sending emails, searching for some way to undo what had already been done. But words, no matter how carefully chosen, couldn't rewrite the past. Then, one evening, just as the sky had begun to darken, he showed up at my door. His shoulders were slumped, the usual confidence in his posture replaced by something else, something quieter, almost fragile. There were dark circles under his eyes, evidence of sleepless nights, and when he finally met my gaze, I saw the exhaustion in them, the weight of everything he'd lost. He took a breath, hesitant, like he wasn't sure where to begin. Then, with a voice softer than I remembered, he asked for a chance to explain. So, I let him talk. And the first words that left his lips were, "I made a mistake." He stood before me, his eyes filled with something that might have once made my heart ache, regret, maybe, or desperation. His voice was quiet, almost pleading, as he spoke words that, in another time, might have meant everything. "I still love you," he said, as if love alone could erase the wreckage left behind. "I don't want to lose what we had." There was a time when hearing those words would have unraveled me, when I would have searched his face for truth, for some reason to believe him. But now, standing there, I felt none of the emotions I might have expected. No searing anger, no unbearable sadness, not even the dull ache of nostalgia. Just clarity. I looked at him, taking in the weight of his words and how little they moved me. Whatever he was searching for in my expression, he wasn't going to find it. There was no going back. "You already lost it," I said, my voice steady and final. For a moment, he didn't move. It was like he was waiting, hoping that I'd take it back, that I'd soften, that something in me would flicker with the hope of reconciliation. But I didn't. I couldn't. And so, after a moment that felt suspended in time, he turned and walked away. That was the last time I saw him. Later, through mutual friends, I heard that Jessica, the woman he'd risked everything for, was gone too. Whatever they'd had, whatever promises had been made in the shadows, it hadn't been worth the destruction it left behind. And yet, none of that mattered anymore. Not to me. Moving on wasn't simple, nor was it painless. Letting go of something that had once meant the world to me felt like learning to walk again after forgetting how to stand. There were days when the echoes of what had been threatened to pull me under, when the weight of betrayal felt too heavy to carry. But I carried it anyway, until one day, I didn't have to. Pain demands to be felt. It carves into you, reshaping the person you thought you were. But it also teaches. It forces you to see the truth, to grow in ways you never wanted to but always needed to. And in the end, it leaves you with something invaluable, strength, wisdom, and the undeniable certainty that you deserve better. I came to understand that love should never be given at the expense of self-respect. That no matter how deeply you care for someone, if loving them means diminishing yourself, it isn't love, it's sacrifice. And the person who truly loves you, the one who sees and values you for who you are, will never leave you questioning where you stand in their heart. They'll never make you doubt your worth. Liam and I stayed in touch over the years, though our lives had taken different directions. He'd faced his own battles, learned his own lessons, and in the process, he became someone stronger, more sure of himself, more certain of what he deserved. He walked a path that was no longer shadowed by the past but shaped by resilience and newfound wisdom. Then, one day, out of the blue, a message from him appeared on my phone. "Thank you for showing me what real love looks like. I won't settle for anything less." That was all, a few simple words. But in them, I heard everything unspoken, the acknowledgement of growth, of understanding, of change. And in that moment, I realized something important. What had been taken from me could never define me. Betrayal had stolen so much: trust, time, the innocence of believing in certain promises. It had left wounds that took time to heal. But it hadn't taken away the most important thing, my ability to choose myself. And that, more than anything, was the greatest victory. Narrators aside, if you've made it this far, thank you for sticking with me. If you haven't already, I'd love for you to subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support means the world. Thank you.